Okay, hello. I hope you guys can hear me well. Oh, fuck's sake. So hey, what's up? It's me, Levara, back again with another studying stream because we're gonna study. So today's topic is gonna be in English. Swear to God, I just saw the cat. Hi Fusima, the cat won't study. Cat is me, yeah. I don't know. She wants to play right now, I think, but I don't know. Hi Leo, how you doing? Welcome. So we're having a quite early morning today. It's not even quite 9 a.m. yet. So that's good. That means we can study so much. So give me a second. I have my little how do you call this in English actually? Map? I think. I don't know. Well, anyway, this is where I store all of my stuff. And we've already gone through, or like I have already gone through the entire stuff here that I needed to study, but now we're doing revisions and doing it again. So I'm just gonna start again from the beginning, and the first chapter is the literate brain, and you can see I already like marked stuff in there, so yeah. Oder für die Horde weiterkämpfen. Ich schau dir lieber zu, wie du lernst. Nice. Kannst natürlich auch gerne nebenbei spielen. Thank you for the follow. Alright. Oops. What's going on here? It's a little messy here. I guess I can put my headset away for a second. Put it here so that it doesn't bother me when I'm studying. Okay, so cognitive neuroscience. Whoop whoop. Yeah, and I also want to put the topic on here. Oh wait, what is it called? What's the author actually? Is this like just the same authors for every chapter? It would seem so. It would seem so. Well, I guess I have to quote. Can you help me? I don't know what it is, Leo. I don't know if I can help you at all. Wait, I think I need to... More. And then I'll make this a little bigger. And this a little smaller. That looks better. Bloopity bloop. That looks good. Alright, so you guys have the name of the chapter, the book, and the authors. And I think that's the authors of all the chapters, because there's no authors for, like, for the single chapters, so I don't know. Okay. God. Okay, let's go. So cognitive neuroscience, we're learning about the literate brain. Cognitive neuroscience is the science of the brain, and not on a cellular level. So like neuroscience usually is researching the brain on a cellular level, and they're researching more like how each neuron is connecting to each other, whereas cognitive neuroscience wants to know more about the functions of the brain regions, you know? So that's that. Okay, the cat is a little, I don't know, annoying. Thank you, Kaze, and hello. Okay. So this chapter, the literate brain, is about how the brain reads. So if you've never studied cognitive neuroscience or neuroscience in general, it's like it basically tries to find out how the brain like works with information, and where the information goes in and where it comes around and stuff. And you usually do that through brain scanning studies or brain imaging studies. So that would be either EEG, where you have lots of different like little blobs on your head, and then that can measure the electricity level on your head and thus in your brain. You can do it with fMRI, with functioning magnetic resonance imaging, which is basically a huge magnet that somehow can make a picture of your brain and can see what brain regions are active during different things that you do. So, yeah. So I think that's the basic stuff. And since I've actually already gone through all of this stuff, like I've been reading through everything already, I don't think that I will actually read through anything this time, but I'll try to explain it on the spot for you guys, which is gonna be a little hard. Like I'll need a couple of minutes every time probably, but yeah, it should work, I hope. So yeah, so alright, so right now this first part of the chapter is just about reading, and then later on we'll also go into writing and how that works in the brain. But right now we're in the reading section and how the brain reads. So reading is pretty important to give information to people without actually having to talk to them, and there can be a lot of time distance or physical distance between two people if you can bring across that information through reading through paper or whatever. The skills that are involved in reading and in learning to read are visual recognition, the manipulation of sounds, learning, and a memory. I guess this is not only reading but also talking, because manipulation of sounds is definitely talking. So visual recognition, that's reading, and lip reading. Manipulation of sounds, that's talking. Learning and memory, so learning new words or new associations between words and objects, and memory, because you need to memorize them as well. There is a theory, or there is the question between, did our brain develop its own part of the brain just for language, or genetically? So like, can we genetically talk, or do we all develop a brain region like that through learning to talk and learning to write and learning to read? And right now the findings are as follows, which are that scientists believe we all develop on our own as individuals regions in the brain that are dedicated to language and to reading and talking and writing. And that is called ontogenetic development, because every individual develops that, in comparison to phylogenetic development, where the whole species develops a brain region that is dedicated to that. 1 second. Mama? Nein! Ah! Guess who was on the kitchen counter? This little girl here. Yes? Can you even read? Can you even read? Bruh, it says no kitchen counter row. Your species, man, didn't develop anything. Hi, Stella. Oh. You know what? Okay, 1 second, I'll show you. You scared me. Okay, so yesterday I was at my parents' place. I actually went to the dentist yesterday, so that's why I didn't stream. But my parents have a huge garden, and like they have different things in their garden. And one of those things is hazelnuts. So if you've never seen hazelnuts in their shell, they actually have a really hard shell that you have to break first. This is a hazelnut. And Momo, for some reason, loves these hazelnuts. Like, she loves to play with them and smell them. I have a nutcracker here as well. Just... Oh. I don't know why she loves them so much. She just smells them a little bit and then tries to, like, get into them. And just now, I caught her on the kitchen counter smelling these damn hazelnuts. And I don't know why. I like hazelnuts a lot, so... Yeah, so I can show you guys. Actually, fresh hazelnuts taste so much better than like normal hazelnuts. So this is a hazelnut with the shell on it, and then you put it in here like this. Okay, well, this is not good. And then you crack the nut. And there you go. And there, that's the hazelnut. Oh well, I have to throw this away. I don't know, maybe Momo likes the hazelnut? I don't know. Thank you for the follow. But it's kind of hard to get it out if it's not like properly crackled. Oh, Momo, no. She just loves it. I don't know what the fuck it is about the hazelnut, but she just likes it. Alright, there we go. Look at that. So you put it out, and then you have a fresh hazelnut. And that's the shell, which you don't eat and you throw away. And it actually tastes a lot more like juicy. I don't know how nuts can taste more juicy, but they do if you like have fresh hazelnuts from the tree. So yeah, there's no genetics or like no, I don't know, no pesticides or anything involved. This is just actually from a parent's tree, like organic as fuck. Tastes good. So yeah, that was a little excursion in hazelnuts. What the hell? And they're a lot softer as well, actually. When they're fresh, they're softer and more juicy. Yeah. All right. Anyway. So language develops a region in the brain specific to in each individual, rather than the whole species having a dedicated region in the brain. Looks more like an acorn than a hazelnut. What is an acorn? Oh, no, it's a hazelnut for sure. Like, acorn have like a little hat on top of this, and this doesn't have a hat. It just has like this thing. But these are really long hazelnuts. Usually the ones you have in the store are shorter, but this is a really long boy. Hazelnuts. Hazelnuts. Okay, whatever. I think no one cares except for me, because I think they're really yummy. Also Eichel als Haselnuss. Okay. So there's also different types of writing systems, as we all know. So there's the, I don't know, actually historical. These are historical origins of writing things. So this is actually maybe quite interesting to see. So if you can maybe tell, this is A, B, C, D, E, F, which is probably the historical like origin of the, I don't know, Roman alphabet. Is that even the Roman alphabet? I don't know. But yeah, the one we know. Then we have Korean, Japanese, Kana, Kanji, Cyrillic, Balinese, Mayan, and Sinhala. So those are different historical origins of languages and of writing systems specifically. And the thing that all writing systems, or most writing systems, have in common is that writing systems developed out of pictures, right? So before there was any writing, if you wanted to pass on information through writing, you drew a picture to symbolize whatever you wanted to show, and that we can see in cave paintings. We can see that kind of stuff. However, what the actual? What the fuck? Anyway, and that developed from just pictures that show what it actually is, to the pictures having a certain phonemic meaning. So if you think about ancient Egypt, they had pictures as letters, but the pictures that they drew didn't actually mean what the picture showed. So like a bird, like a little eagle, did not actually mean in a literal sense eagle, but stood for something else. And that is kind of how it developed. So it went from like drawing something and meaning that literally what you drew, to you draw something as a representation of something else. So yeah. And oh yeah, and there's a difference between one word, one symbol principle that is called logographic. So you have, for one word, you have one symbol, and there's also, I don't know what the other thing is called actually. So that would be modern Chinese and Japanese kanji would be logographic because they have one symbol for one word. And the nowadays more popular thing in language is to have different syllables or different, I don't know, individual characters that form a word. I think. Phonations. So instead of having one letter for, or one symbol for one word, we have a phonetic system where we voice out the words that we mean. So we show through the letters how we want someone else to pronounce that word instead of having one symbol. You know what I mean? And that's different in different languages, and different languages developed differently. Through time, they also developed at different time, but they all have like some common things. Hi, Cruz. So now I have another little picture for you guys, which basically shows, on the one hand, how large the units are. So if we have lots of different letters, how much information is contained in one unit. So one letter would be one unit, one symbol would be one unit. That is on the y-axis, and on the x-axis we have a differentiation between a transparent language and an opaque language. The difference between a transparent language and an opaque language is that in a transparent language you actually pronounce the words as they are written down, and in an opaque language you pronounce the words differently than they're written down. Alright? So let's take a little closer look. So we have very, very opaque languages, so where you don't know how to pronounce the word just by reading it, if you don't know the word, that is. And we have Chinese and kanji with large units, so one unit contains lots of information, which would be one symbol would contain a whole word, and it is not, it is opaque, so we don't know actually how to pronounce it just by reading it. Then in the middle, somewhere here, we have kana in Japanese and Indian, which have middle-sized units, but are actually transparent, so if we read those, we actually know how to pronounce them by reading. And then we have, down here, we have small units, so that would be our normal alphabet that we're used to, with one unit, so one letter not containing that much information. And very transparent languages are Italian or German, which you actually pronounce as you write them, especially Italian. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have a very opaque language like English, where the grammatical rules don't apply very often. Alright, so grapheme, the term grapheme is normally used to denote the smallest meaningful unit of a written language. So those like size of units, this axis was actually referring to graphemes. So the smallest unit in which you contain information, which would be a letter in, for example, Italian, and a whole symbol in Chinese, for example. I have a little cat here and I want her to come here. Look how cute. Oh my god. Yes, come here. Come here. My little baby. Yes. Okay. I think we're comfy. Yesterday she didn't like this actually. But yeah, okay. So that's basically the that's the different types of differentiation between languages. So we have opaque orthography and transparent orthography, and we have graphemes, which contain the smallest bit of information in a written language. And examples for an opaque language, so for languages that don't actually pronounce, thank you for the follow, that don't actually pronounce things as they're written, are for example English and French. And you can, for example, tell when you spell the words comb, home, and Rome, they are all spelled differently. Hi. Yes. I want her to be a little more independent here, so I can spell those out for you. Comb, home, and Rome. These are all spelled differently, completely different words, but are like pronounced the same, and that is an opaque language. So you actually don't spell it like you say it. So yeah. So we're at the first subtopic. So this was just the introduction to the whole topic to understand what language is. Okay, you're mad, bro. Don't be mad, bro. Don't be mad, bro. Okay. Now we have now we come into the more cognitive neuroscience-y part, which is visual word recognition. So for us to read, we need to recognize the words as words and not as random squiggles, but actually as something we can work with and get information of. The first subchapter is called Cognitive Mechanisms of Visual Word Recognition. Now let me see if I can remember all of this and if I can explain it properly. I need to read it a little bit. Okay, so the first thing that a study could find out more than 100 years ago was that in our brain, longer words and shorter words, so like short words need almost the same processing time as long words, which means that we don't recognize words that we already know as their individual letters, but as a whole word. So the word butterfly is probably almost as fast processed as the word cat. because we both have, we don't read every letter by itself, but we actually recognize one word as a whole. So butterfly and cat for us are a single unit, kind of. Of course, if you read it out loud, it will take longer to spell butterfly or to say butterfly than it takes to say cat. But in the brain, you read it almost as fast. So there is actually no relation between, or there's almost no relation between word length and how long it takes for you to process that word. So the actual visual process of recognizing a word is not affected by the length if you already know that word. So letter strings, for example butterfly, are processed parallel rather than serially. So if you see the word butterfly, your brain doesn't process it as B-U-T-T-E-R-F-L-I, but your brain processes all the words in one. It just goes in, done. And like when you speak, so that's when you read something. But when you say the word butterfly, you actually have to pronounce every word in a serial manner. So that's the first difference between actually reading and speaking, is that when you read, it can be processed in parallel, and if you speak, you actually have to pronounce every word and every letter to a certain extent. So that's the first thing that we learn through some, through these studies. And one exception is also if you need to make an eye movement during reading. So if the word is so long that your eyes can't see the whole word while reading it, it also takes longer because your eyes need to do a saccade, so they need to have a new fixation. So you need butterfly, 2 eye movements, which also takes longer. Then there was also studies that where the participants had to recognize one letter in different conditions. So for example, they had to recognize the letter R. And participants were actually faster to recognize the letter R if it was placed in a word rather than by itself. What? Okay, what? Okay. I'll read this because I didn't remember. Presented briefly, then performance is enhanced if the letter is presented in the context of a word, for example carpet, or a nonsense letter string that follows the combinatorial rules of the language, for example harpet, then in a random letter string or even a single letter isolation. Okay. So if you get briefly presented with you briefly get presented a word and you have to say if it contained the letter R. And participants were faster in recognizing the letter R if it was placed in an actual word, so carpet, or if it was placed in a nonsense word that was still following the combinatorial rules of language. So for example harpet, and they were slower when it was just a random letter string, so for example CTRPAE, or just actually the single letter R. That is so that's a sign. Okay, this is termed word superiority effect. That effect is called word superiority effect because words are superior in recognizing letters than single letters or nonsense letter strings. It suggests that there are units of representation corresponding to letter clusters that influence the visual recognition of letters and words. Huh. Aufmerksamkeitsdefizit, Hyperaktivitätsstörung. Ja, Stella Vore, das fällt in diese Kategorie von, erstens muss man da eine Augenbewegung machen, um das zu lesen. Das heißt, das dauert schon länger. Aber du brauchst nicht sehr viel länger als jetzt zum Beispiel, also wenn wir das vergleichen jetzt mit Schmetterling, dann brauchst du jetzt für Aufmerksamkeitsdefizit, Hyperaktivitätsstörung, brauchst du nicht doppelt so lange, das zu lesen, als Schmetterling, obwohl es doppelt so lange ungefähr oder doppelt so lang ist. Also es ist kein linearer Zusammenhang zwischen der Zeit und der Länge des Wortes, you know? Intracranial EEG recording suggests that word like okay. Also after 200 milliseconds after being presented a visual word, the mid-fusiform cortex is activated. Oh, ho, ho. Wah! Hi. Okay. She's a little annoyed. Interaction between visual process and lexical semantic process, such as stimuli, typical letter patterns can be discriminated around. Okay, so after 100 milliseconds, you can differentiate between just a visual process, or between just a visual stimuli and a word. So your brain, after seeing something, it needs 100 milliseconds to recognize if it is a word or if it is not a word. Okay. And word recognition is a top-down process. You don't need to know what that is. I'm not going to explain it. Yeah. One commonly used task to investigate word recognition is lexical decision, in which participants must make a two-way forced choice judgment about whether a letter string is a word or not. Okay, so basically there was a study where participants were forced to make a lexical decision where they got presented words and they had to say if it is a real word or not. And if the word was really similar to a real word, then the participants took longer to decide whether it was a word. Okay. Stell doch die Nuss auf den Boden. Ja, das habe ich gestern schon gemacht. Aber ich glaube, jetzt gerade möchte sie ein bisschen kuscheln. Ja. Do you want to cuddle? Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to cuddle? Do you want to cuddle? Oh, okay. Do you want to cuddle? This is looking a lot better. Oh. Okay. Alright. So there's also different parts in a word that you can recognize, as we can see here. So on the one hand, you can recognize the different strokes, as in the top corner there, all the way up there. Then you can recognize a letter, and finally you can recognize a word. Also, you can even recognize words if you don't have all the information, which is shown on the other side over there. So you can recognize the letter or the word carpet, even though the R in carpet is kind of fucked. The same happens if there's like, I don't know, like if there's double meaning kind of ambiguous graphemes, so you can read the second thing as the cat, even though the H and the A are the same letter, so they look the same. So yeah, that's the thing. So yeah. Bei dem Beispiel könnte man im ersten Blick meinen, dass es ein Wort ist, da es rau als die ersten 3 Buchstaben hat, aber dann in Nonsens verfällt. Hä? Wo? I don't know. Alright, so there is also a theory that we have a visual lexicon where we actually store all this information about words. So we actually have a memory just for reading words, that where we have all the words represented and where we know how they look like, that we kind of go to whenever we read, and that is activated whenever we read. Also called the orthographic lexicon. And there was also a study where the orthographic lexicon was tested, where people had to respond to words. I don't know, basically this whole science, or the whole, like, all the studies regarding this topic are pretty fucking boring, and they're all just like, okay, you show someone a word really quickly, and then they have to decide whether it's a word or not, or whether the 2 words belong together and stuff like that. So that's the whole freaking thing. One of them was, for example, if words belong together, so butter and bread, and how fast people are at recognizing them together. So it was theorized that words that semantically belong together, so words that belong together in the theme of their words, are recognized faster together than words that don't belong together. So for example, we have bread and butter, which is recognized faster than doctor and butter, because doctor and butter have nothing or almost nothing to do with each other. But this was actually proven kind of wrong, because people so if you say, for example, bread and cake, they're in the same category, but people actually couldn't recognize them faster, which developed, or in which, out of which the new theory came, that words that very often come together in language and go together in language, for example, bread and butter, that those are recognized faster together, rather than words that just have the same or a similar meaning, or in the same category of meanings. So if you get the word robin, you don't think of the word bird as fast as you think of the word hood, because Robin Hood is being said more often than robin and bird, because robin is a bird. It's a type of bird, I don't know. So yeah, Robin Hood. Hi Hulk Smash, what is this sign language class? No, if you read the title, it says it's studying with cognitive neuroscience, and right now the chapter is the literate brain. So we're studying how the brain processes language and how the brain reads right now. So yeah, and I articulate with my hands a lot just because that's the person I am. That has nothing to do with anything. Alright. the visual word form area. So it is actually theory or evidence that there is a certain area in our brain that is there to form words. So fMRI studies have reported that in the left mid-occipitotemporal gyrus, also called the fusiform gyrus, that is a so-called visual word form area. So the left mid-occipitotemporal, so like here-ish, occipitotemporal. So here, gyrus. So this like stripe here is the visual word form area, VWFA. What happens when you drink alcohol? I don't know, that's not in the chapter right now. If you want to, I can answer questions about different things about neuroscience later on, but right now we're doing words and how to read. This suggests that neurons have become tuned. Neurons have become tuned to the visual properties of known languages, of known letters, and common letter patterns. So actually, this part of the brain back here is where your visual information comes in. So the eyes get the information, and then there's like very long neurons that go all the way back there, and the information is actually being processed in the back of your brain. And also, because words and reading have lots to do with vision, on the left, the word form area, visual word form area, is also very close to that. So it's very close to where vision gets processed. Yes, all right. So then there was some fMRI studies again. What happens to your brain when you drink alcohol? Your brain releases GABA neurotransmitters, which inhibit certain other areas. For example, the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is there to make, informed decisions and to make more complex decisions. So that part of the brain is then weakened. In general, alcohol is actually an inhibitor or an inhibiting drug. So it basically just like slowly shuts down your ability to judge, your ability to make social decisions, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah. And it affects GABA neurotransmitters, which are also, for example, activated in smoking. Anyway, that's not the topic right now, though. So in fMRI studies, they tested if long words or short words have more activation or less activation. So the theory would have been that short words have less activation than long words in the visual word form area. Hi. Thank you for the follow. That theory actually could not be proved. So long words and short words took the same amount of energy in the brain to process, which further supports the theory that a word is actually recognized as a whole chunk. So if you see one word, you recognize it completely, like as a single chunk. That's what it says here. Chunky boy. But the same thing has not been found for non-words or for new words. So this is only true. Your brain only sees a word as one chunk if your brain already has information about that word and how to read it and what it is. However, if it's a non-word, then your brain can't process it all at once. Hey, sleepy boy. Okay. This suggests that word-based activity is indeed orthographic rather than phonological, which basically means that these findings suggest that when we read words, it is rather based on visual stimuli rather than us sounding out the word. So instead of your brain saying butterfly, it just says butterfly. And that phonological, that reading butterfly as every single word, that would be phonological, every single letter. And orthographic would be that you just, just read it as a fucking word. I don't fucking know. Okay, so we can have, so I just tried to explain that the visual word form area is somewhere here, but actually we have a picture. I have a graph for you guys. So this is where the visual word form area actually is. On the left side, in the back of the brain, kind of in there. No, that's a lot better than how I described it. I drink lead, does that damage my brain? I don't know, you have to try it out. What's the weirdest cognitive neuroscience jargon, you know? Oh, there's lots of weird jargon. It's just mostly Latin words smashed together that try to describe a thing. But it's very descriptive. It's like, if you know the basics of neuroscience, then you don't have to learn every single word itself, because it's very descriptive. So like if I say prefrontal cortex, it means in front of the brain. That's just the literal translation. So I know it's like right here, right? Like that's the prefrontal cortex here. Because it just means in front of the brain. Like I don't fucking know. Damn. How do you feel about the current turmoil with the US and Iran? Well, I study cognitive neuroscience, so I don't know. What happens when I get simulated? I don't know. Does shock therapy work? On very hard and extreme cases, yes. But it's not. Shock therapy is not the gold standard by any means. It's more like a last resort of the last resort if nothing else works. Man liest auch nicht einzelne Buchstaben, um ein Wort zu erkennen. Richtig, außer du kennst das Wort nicht. Dann liest du tatsächlich alle einzelnen Buchstaben. Are you a therapist? Nope. Is telekinesis real? No. But brains can think similarly. So if you have a twin that has has very similar upbringing than you, and you have very similar experiences in your life, then it is very likely or very probable that you think very similarly, because your brain also probably developed in a similar way. But that does not mean it's telekinesis. What part of the brain gives me a boner? Your reptile brain. It's not a very complex process. I'm going to do shock therapy on myself. That's not gonna work. Ignoring me. I got hit in the brain and you ignore me. Well, I don't know. That sucks, I guess. Sucks to be you. Double loss. You took the double out right there. Alright, so after answering all these very interesting questions, let's get back into the visual word form area that is located in the left occipital mediotemporal region. Is it mediotemporal or just temporal? I should know this actually. Lol. Where is it located? Oh, oops. This is not where I find this information. In the left mid-occipitotemporal gyrus. Left mid-occipitotemporal gyrus. Good shit. What if me and my twin have a baby? Then will our offspring have a better chance of telekinesis? Thank you for the follow, and no, but you will have a better chance of getting genetic diseases. That's good. Alright, so after that we shall continue. In the left mid-occipitotemporal gyrus with the visual word form area. So there was actually also studies, fMRI studies, that were that researched how illiterate people and also people who do not read visually, so blind people, so braille readers, compared to normal experienced readers. And the better the people could read, the more increased the area was in the left word form, visual word form area, and there was a tendency for literacy to reduce the responsiveness of this region to faces. So actually, if we if you are illiterate and you have never learned to read, then this region that usually is dedicated towards reading words actually is dedicated to recognizing faces, which is really interesting. So that's apparently how it all developed a little bit. So there was also a study with blind participants that were reading Braille, and blind individuals were found to activate the left visual word form area when reading Braille relative to touching other kinds of objects. So that's actually quite interesting. So blind people, when reading Braille, also activated the visual word form area, even though they don't have visual stimuli, rather than they actually have the kinetic stimuli. So that's pretty interesting, I think. Also, the reason why it is on the left side, so most of the visual word recognition is actually on the left side and not on the right side, and that might be due to the fact that the whole language system is actually around here. So left in your left temporal lobes, there's lots of language processing and lexical things going on. Indeed, literates relative to illiterates show greater top-down activation of the visual word form area in response to processing speech as well. So not only when reading, but also when hearing speech, that word form area is somewhat activated compared to people who do not know how to read. Okay, hi Dome TV, can you explain to me that if you decide to change something, for example, learn more or do more sport, then you sleep one night and the motivation for these things is suddenly much lower than the night before? Is there a cognitive effect that brings you back these bad habits? That is actually not how theoretically it should work, unless your subconscious tries to fuck you up a little bit. So basically, usually when you sleep, information is actually being saved, and I don't know, like your brain can process all the information that it got during the day, and it just like is it's basically saved in your brain better, in your long-term memory. So the thing is though that maybe there could be a theory that you have your natural like day and night circle might be that you're actually a lot more active and a lot more willing to do things in the evenings compared to mornings. So maybe the whole day your baseline is like this, like okay, like whatever, and then in the afternoon it goes up, your energy level and your motivation, and in the evening and it goes up and up and up, and then right before you sleep, it has to go down again. And so it could be that in this like up phase you decide to change something and to do something and you're very motivated. However, the next day when you wake up and you don't have those energy levels anymore, then you might be like, oh, I don't want to change anything anymore anyway. So that could be a reason. Or maybe after you go to sleep and your brain has processed all the information, maybe your brain decided that it was too much of an effort to change something, because your brain is lazy and it is hard to make changes. So for anyone who has a lazy brain, which is everyone, you have to actually put in a lot of effort to change something rather than letting your brain do the comfortable thing all the time. So there could be a bunch of reasons. I'd have to look more into it, but for like cognitive neuroscientific evidence or reasons, then one of those might be it. Hello, Mrs. Cat. Why are you so sleepy? Okay. All right. So the language system is actually on the, where's the left? There, on the left side. Literates relative to illiterates show greater top-down activation processing speech. Yes, okay. In left-handers, okay, now this is interesting. Left-handers, the lateralization of the visual word form area tends to correlate with the dominant lateralization of speech observed in frontal lobes. So what that means is that the reason why there might be some left-handers is, I think, somewhat scientifically proven, that in people that write with their right hand, their like word processing is in their left part of the brain, whereas for people who write with their left hand, their language processing is in the right part of the brain. And that also correlates with where their visual word form area is. So more often than not, the visual word form area is on the side that your language area is. So if it's on the right side, then your word forming area is also on the right side, and if it's on the left side, as with almost all of the people, most people, it will also be on the left side. Hello, Angst. Yeah, that's pretty interesting, I'd say. I was in a conference this year and there was a guy from New Guinea. He's researching sleeping behaviors, he said, and it's obvious that if you sleep less than 8 hours, you don't get full cognitive energy. Is there also a negative effect? I mean, depends on your age, right? Like, I also did research on sleep myself. I did a little bit in that. And basically it's like the older you are, the less sleep you need. So if you're a teenager, you will need a lot more sleep than if you're like 60, 70, 80 years old. Then you need like, 6 hours of sleep a night? So as a normal functioning adult, I'd say 8 hours of sleep is quite standard. If you sleep more than that, then you're just kind of wasting your time. If you sleep less than that, then your brain doesn't actually get the chance to reorganize and restore all the chemicals. So basically, what happens is during the day there's a build-up of different neurotransmitters and chemicals in your brain that will get that will like get reset during the night when you sleep. And if you don't reset them properly, then on the next day your memory function is not going to be as good, your attention function is not going to be as good, and so on and so forth. So there's that. But like if you don't sleep 8 hours once, then it doesn't matter. It's just like if it's a reoccurring thing. Okay? Okay. So there's also other evidence that suggests, or some researchers suggest, that actually the visual word form area is not only there for visual word forming, but also for other forms of information processing. And they argue that the visual word form area is just there to kind of like a computational hub where information is getting connected, rather than where visual words are getting processed. So that this is just where different brain areas get connected. So yeah. And then we have a really nice picture here, which says that so when information goes through from your eyes to your brain, that information, thank you for the follow, that information gets processed on the way there. So there's a V1, V2, V3, V4, up till V8, which means visual 1, visual 2, visual 3, blah blah. So that's just the stages of word recognizing. So the further it goes, the more it gets, and the more complex things, and the more it gets processed until it comes to the back here. So and different visual areas prefer different types of stimuli. So that is drawn here. So it goes from the bottom to the top. This is all the way in front, almost where the eye just gets the information, up to where the eye processes all the information completely. And you can see here that on the bottom it's still like very basic. So the very first visual areas actually just differentiate between black and white and light and dark, and then it becomes more of like a shape, or like a, I don't know how many there are, oriented bars. Okay, so which direction they go into, so like if they go like this or if they go like this. Then the V2 actually sees some shapes, so it wants to see what kind of, I don't know, what shape it has. Then you can see even more shapes, then you see even more shapes, and then you see even more, and then you actually see the word tent. So that's like the preferred visual stimuli that the brain prefers during different stages. Erzähl mir mehr über die süße Katze. Diese süße Katze ist die nervigste Katze der Welt. Sie mag gerne, sie schnuppert gerne an Haselnüssen, kuschelt auch manchmal gerne, manchmal auch nicht so gerne. Man weiß es nicht so genau, was sie immer möchte. Ja. But it fucks really up. I should change some getting sleep routine at the moment and sleeping while watching documentations. Well, it's actually not very uncommon to wake up during the night. It's more like people who are more stressed out usually wake up more during the night and have more trouble sleeping through the night. However, it is actually quite natural to wake up during the night, because you don't like there's different sleep stages, right? And you've heard of REM sleep probably, rapid eye movement sleep, which is a sleep that is actually very similar to being awake. So it's actually really easy to wake up right after REM sleep, because it's the brain activity in REM is actually very similar to being awake, or quite similar. It's not the same, but it's quite similar. So it could be, and you have REM sleep during multiple stages of the night. Usually in the first half of the night you don't have very much REM, and then in the second half of the night you have quite a lot of REM sleep. So it could be that in the first couple of hours you sleep quite well, I don't know, and then you get like your first REM, and then from that REM you actually wake up, and then you go back to sleep, go back into N3, blah blah, and then maybe in the later stages of the night, the more REM you have, the more likely it is that you wake up. So maybe reduce your stress factors. That is also always something that I would suggest. But it's not uncommon, like it's not weird. But yeah. It has been argued that damage to this region, so to the visual word form area, produces a specific difficulty with reading, namely pure alexia, or letter by letter reading. So now we're at the alexia, or letter by letter reading, which basically, if you have pure alexia, it means that you can't read words as a word, but you can read every single letter and then figure out what the word is. So when you have the word cat, someone with pure alexia cannot read the whole word cat, but they can read C-A-T and then remember what C-A-T, like what kind of word that makes, and then they know that it's cat. That is presumably the defect of the visual word form area. Okay, little cat, you don't want to sit with me anymore. So yeah, so in neuroscience, it's usually really important to also do studies with patients who cannot perform the task that you're researching, because then you have proof whether or not it actually does what you think it does. Because if someone can't do it anymore, then yeah. So people with pure alexia actually do take longer to read a word the longer the word is. So for normal people without pure alexia, we read a word and it doesn't matter how long the word is, we usually need similar processing times. So it's not a linear correlation, it's actually like more like, okay, we need the same amount of time-ish for very short and quite long words. Extremely long words we need a little longer for, but still it's not a linear correlation. However, with pure alexia, the longer the word is, the longer the people need to read it, because they need to read every single letter, one by one. And that is a linear correlation. So that's pure alexia. Woo. Ja, wir gehen jetzt durch ein paar verschiedene Arten von Dyslexie durch. Ich weiß aber nicht, was Legastheniker sind, ehrlich gesagt. Legasthenie. Ich glaube, Legasthenie ist der Überbegriff, oder? Ich glaube, Legasthenie ist ein Überbegriff für diese ganze Gruppe. Also Dyslexie beinhaltet nämlich nur die Diagnose vom Nicht-Lesen können, und Legasthenie beinhaltet Lesen und Schreiben. You know? Und das hier bezieht sich nur auf Lesen. Das heißt, ich glaube, Legasthenie ist ein Überbegriff, und dann kann man noch unterscheiden zwischen Arten von Dyslexie. Okay, so then we have peripheral dyslexia. Pure alexia is an example of a type of peripheral dyslexia. So we have pure alexia, and that is a subtype of peripheral dyslexia. Peripheral dyslexics are believed to disrupt processing up to the level of computation of a visual word form, and also include various spatial and attentional disturbances that affect word recognition. Okay, so that means that people with peripheral dyslexia have problems up to the level of computation of a visual word. So up to the point, so anything that happens up to recognizing a word, that is disturbed with them. But the actual, when they recognize the word, then they have no problems with using it. They don't have problems with knowing the words and knowing what they mean and stuff. So the more complex things, or the more complex processes about reading they actually can do, or about knowing language, but the recognizing of the word and everything up till that, they can't do. So that includes spatial and attentional disturbances, so anything that really has to do with spelling. This stands to contrast to varieties of central dyslexia. So now we had peripheral dyslexia, now we have central dyslexia that disrupt processing after computation of a word. So those people can actually form a word, but then everything after that, so what the word means and like putting it into categories and stuff, that is a problem for people with central dyslexia, or a type of central dyslexia. Alright. So the defining behavioral characteristic of pure alexia is that reading time increases proportionally to the length of the word. Each letter is processed serially rather than the normal parallel recognition. So we all recognize words in parallel, whereas people with pure alexia recognize each letter individually, which takes longer, of course. And there are 3 reasons why that may be. Now we're all curious to hear what they are. First, it may be related to more basic difficulties in visual perception. It may relate to attentional or perceptual problems associated with perceiving more than one item at a time. Or it may relate specifically to the processing of written stimuli within the visual form system or visual lexicon. So the first theory is that when you can't read because you have problems in recognizing visual patterns or visual perception in general. The second one is you have attentional or perceptual problems associated with reading more than one letter, and like reading or like having parallel processing. Or the third is that just the visual word form area is defected. So you can see those 3 theories get more and more specific. So the first one was just okay, in general maybe they have problems with recognizing in visual perception. The second one is maybe just attentional and perceptual problems, and the third one is just this visual word form area is defected. So, and there has been some research done, and researchers have been fighting over which one is the reason for pure alexia. And And they have come to the conclusion that it is not only a visual process. So I think they're ruling out the first option. So they don't think it's just because they have problems in like recognizing visual stimuli in general. But they actually think that it is a hybrid account between visual deficits and orthography-specific deficits. Disruption of information flow at various stages from early visual to word-specific levels can result in cessation of parallel letter reading and adoption of letter-by-letter strategies. Yeah. So the researchers have kind of agreed that it is like multiple things go wrong during the processing of the word. So yeah, and they also have an example for something that is really hard to read. So some scripts are particularly difficult for letter-by-letter readers. Note the perceptual difficulty in recognizing M in isolation. So there has been different studies, of course, that have tried to, for example, fuck's sake, okay. So, for example, the letter E, you can write a capital letter E and a lower letter E, and they both mean the same thing, right? So like E and E mean the same thing, and in our brains it's the same letter, but it's visually, if you look at it, it's not the same. It doesn't look the same, right? Momo? Okay. People or researchers have tried to see if that's maybe something that people with pure alexia are struggling with, to recognize, to differentiate these different looking letters. So this is a very visual problem, right? If you can't differentiate that, or more like if you can't put it together in your brain that those are the same letter. And they also tried to make people with pure alexia read different fonts. So they tried to make them read in this font or in like a little squirrely, like these loopity-loop font. I'll show you. And they found that it's easier for someone with pure alexia to read this kind of font rather than the loopity-loopy font. So, for example, this smile. This word is really hard to read for someone with dyslexia because it's really hard for them to differentiate the different letters themselves because they're so close together, and it just looks like a squiggly mess. And it is especially hard for them in this case to read the letter M because they don't recognize it as the letter M, but they could think it's a U, they could think it's an N, they could think it's an I. So it's really hard for them to read this letter in this font particularly, because I don't know why, but that's just what the researchers have found. So it's a perceptual thing. So it's your perception, the eyes, the eyeballs, and then everything right after the eyeballs are having a hard time with recognizing what it is. Cool. Der Barcode-Trick, um bei StarCraft nicht reportet zu werden, mit kleinem L und I. Wow, okay, ich wusste nicht, dass man da nicht reportet werden möchte. So, das sind die Barcodes. Stella, wow, du glaubst, du hast Legasthenie? Ich glaube, das hättest, also wenn es wirklich schwere Legasthenie gewesen wäre, oder ist, dann hättest du schon eine Diagnose. Vielleicht hast du es, vielleicht bist du einfach so ein Mensch, dem es wirklich einfach egal ist. Dein Gehirn funktioniert gut, aber einfach deinem Gehirn ist es auch egal. Könnte auch sein. Also, man weiß es nicht. I just developed a puzzle app for children to the age of 3 to 6 years to detect dyslexia in preschool before they start to learn some writing and reading. The fact that they will fall way behind. Hopefully the evaluation will be successful. Yes, hopefully it will. I think especially that diagnostics for children is really important to be fun. So like if you diagnose a child with, you know, any form of illness, like psychologically of course, it's always important that it is fun, that it's colorful, and that the child doesn't feel like it's being like interrogated or something. So yeah, I have had some experience with diagnostic kits for children, and they're so fun. It's basically just games. You just play games. It's so cool. Like, I don't know. I think it is, at least. I don't know. Hi, the hawk. Guten Tag. Okay, now Momo is going to sleep. Good night, Momo. Sleep well. Sleep well. Yeah. Okay. Alright. So. Oh. In pure alexia. Oh yeah, and also they found. So alexia, it looks. So it looks like this. Like this. Reading time and word length. So the longer the word, the longer the reading time, and it does not look like this for people who can normally read. And then we have another thing, which is so basically, I have to read this actually. I don't know what it is about. So it's reaction time again, and okay, and people or patients with pure alexia have difficulties determining whether two letters are the same if it's a capital letter and a lowercase letter. So as I just said before. So they actually, okay, so in this case, the physical matching, so this is reaction time, and in the physical matching, so they had to either say if AA is the same or A and lowercase a is not the same. And they were actually good at saying if they're the same, like if they look the same or not. So they could differentiate the looks. They could say, okay, this looks similar and this doesn't look similar. But if they had to match if they mean the same thing, then they had difficulties. So they had to judge whether uppercase A and the lowercase a have the same meaning, if they're the same letter. That they had problems with. But they could say if they looked the same or not. No? Okay. So evidence suggests that the flow of information from lower to higher levels is reduced rather than blocked. Many pure alexic patients are able to perform lexical decisions or even semantic categorizations. So that would be, they have to categorize whether a word is an animal or a word is a plant. They were good at that. For briefly presented words that they cannot read. Okay, that's actually interesting. So, there was people with pure alexia, and they can't read the words, right? But if you give them the words flower and tree, very short, like you just present the words flower and tree, and you ask them if the words mean the same or are in the same category, so like the category plants, they will correctly say that they are in the same category, whereas if you say car and tree, then they will correctly say that they are not in the same category. Even though they can't read the words. If you ask them to read car and tree, they're not going to be able to do it. Like we are. They can do it eventually. But their brain can still process what it means, which is pretty interesting. So the evidence suggests that they just have, so pure alexics have difficulty between the lower levels of processing, so more the visual processing, and the higher level of processing, which is what the word means and stuff. So they have, that process is a little blocked. It's not completely blocked, but it's just reduced. That's a better word. It's reduced. One needs to assume that there is some partial parallel processing of the letter string that is able to access meaning and lexical representations, but is insufficient to permit conscious visual word recognition. So basically, there is some kind of stream of information that can tell the person what the word means, but it cannot go into the conscious mind. But the meanings can't reach the conscious mind for some reason to tell the person what it actually means. But they know, but it not really. It's kind of weird. Evaluation. Okay. Evaluation. So basically, yeah. I didn't mark anything here, so I don't think anything there is important. Maybe it's interesting how we read. So there's lots of reading studies, clearly, and there's eye movements and fixations. And the eye can only see if the eye is fixated on something. So you know how you move your eyes, and when you move your eyes you can't see anything. Like, your brain does not process that information while you're moving. It only processes while you're standing still. Your eye is standing still. So the following, this here, shows how an eye fixates. So the dots are where it stands still, and the arrows are the movements of the eye. So yeah, for example, Goldilocks is quite an unusual word, so the fixations actually were pretty long and pretty often, whereas some words got skipped. So on her way to her grandma, the "to" actually got skipped because it's a very common word. And when we have a fixation, we actually fix, so we can see this part of the sentence. So the eye fixation is here, and our visual field actually goes slightly forward. So it actually goes in front of the sentence and not very much behind the sentence. Oh my god, okay. Can you focus? Well, yeah, that here. So this is the fixation. And that is actually, so like, you know how we read from left to right? So our fixation is more towards the right. So we have a fixation and it's more, towards one side. And if you actually read from right to left, as in some languages, I think Arabic and Japanese you read from up to down, but the same concept, and the eye actually fixates towards the direction in which you're reading. So it doesn't actually matter what direction you're reading into, but the word will always fixate that's what is to come more, or will see it more. So yeah. Ist die Augenbewegung zwischen den Wörtern länger als Silben oder nicht? Die sind immer unterschiedlich. Kommt auch auf die Person drauf an, aber in general, words that we already know don't get fixated as much as words that we don't know. So difficult words get fixated, not difficult words don't get fixated, or fixated very shortly. So you can see it's actually different from word to word. Some are bigger, some are very small. It depends on the word and how well you are used to reading those words. So it's different from person to person. Zu verschwommen kann ich es nicht lesen. Also ich wollte nur die Punkte mit den Dingen zeigen. Also manchmal sind die Sprünge sehr klein, wenn das Wort kompliziert ist. Manchmal sind die Sprünge sehr groß, wenn die Wörter schon bekannt sind und nicht so schwierig zu lesen sind. Alright, then the next topic is reading aloud. Routes from spelling to sound. Okay, and there's two different routes that we can take. One is direct access and one is phonological mediation. And okay, so there's two theories. as how we can read words out loud. The one theory is that it goes from visual processing, so we read a word, it goes through the visual stream, we recognize the word in our brain, it recognizes the word, okay, and then it can go either from recognizing it to actually reading it out loud, so phonological meaning, which means that it goes from recognizing the word to directly speaking the word out loud, or how to spell or to speak the word. Yeah. And you can also go directly into what the word itself means at the same time. So we go in here, we recognize the word, we know what the word is, and then it goes into, on the one hand, how you spell it and how you pronounce it, and on the other hand, what the word means at the same time. That theory is called direct access, because from the word recognition, you have direct access into pronouncing the word and into what the word means. And then there's another theory that is called phonological mediation, where we see the word, we process the word, okay, we recognize the word in our brain, and then we have to know how the word is spelled. That is called phonological retrieval, and then we can access the meaning of the word, only when we know how it is spelled. So that's the two theories, which are, we need to know how to spell a word in order to know what it means, or we can immediately know what the word means without spelling it. So which one is the real one? So it's called phonological mediation because to know how to spell the word mediates between recognizing the word, knowing how to spell it, and then knowing what it means. So it mediates, so to say. Hi Mondschwein hier. Dachte, ich muss anfangen zu arbeiten. Oh my god. To know if this is actually a thing, there were scientists that did research on homophones. So words that means different things, but they sound the same. So in this case, they took the word rose and rose. So they're spelled differently, but they mean the same thing. Rose and rose. And they would also have pseudo-homophones. So like they would just make up words that are spelled differently, but like are pronounced the same kind of thing. But like the one of the words isn't just not a real word. And the results were that people who were reading so if you were reading rose, like not the plant, but like a row, then people were more prone to make mistakes to know if it is a flower or not. So if you ask rose equals flower, then people would make more mistakes because it sounds like a rose, but it's a row. So that was kind of evidence that mapping between visual words and their meaning requires phonological mediation. So understanding text depends on first accessing the spoken form of a word. Okay? So that was the evidence for that. Because people were shit at recognizing whether that was a flower or not, even though clearly in your brain you know it's not a flower, but it sounds the same if you spell it out as a flower. So This suggests intact access from text to meaning together with impaired access from text to speech. Okay, I don't know. Okay. Well, the most influential models of reading aloud are based on a dual route model of reading, initially put forward by Marshall and Newcomb. The key features of the model are semantically based reading routes in which visual words are able to access semantics directly, and phonologically based reading route that uses known regularities between spelling patterns and phonological patterns. This route is also called grapheme phoneme route. Okay. So, basically there's two different theories now as to how you can read a word, and generally if you read the word and you immediately know what it means, then that's the faster route. Whereas if you read the word and you use the general rules of reading, then it takes longer. But it's still, like, you can still do that. Ich habe da ein gutes Beispiel dafür, wie hart das Gehirn fehlt. Es ist nicht schwierig. Es ist nicht schwierig, das Gehirn auszutricksen. Da gibt es aber sicher viele Videos, weil ja. Ihr könnt ja selber gerne auch mal googeln. Ich sehe mir jetzt keine Videos an, weil ich kenne die meisten Phänomene auch schon. Und das ist eigentlich nur eine Wiederholung gerade für mich, um mir die Modelle gut zu merken. Aber ja, also wir haben hier, we have two different models. So, grapheme phoneme conversion is bit by bit, and semantic access route is holistic. Ah, the sun is coming out again. Ah, so once I come. Fuck's sake. Every fucking time. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, fuck. I just needed to stretch. Alright, so I can show you guys this model where it shows how to read. Do you guys want to see? Oh, okay. Guess I'll show you. So this is how to read. So this one is the grapheme phoneme conversion, where you just kind of like, you just read out the different parts of the word, and just like by the general rules of reading, you kind of figure out how to spell the word. So that's that. And then we have semantic way of reading, which means that like you know how the word is pronounced, you know what the word means, you know how it is pronounced, so you just kind of like pronounce it immediately. Speech, you have an immediate speech production process. There. So that's the two models, or the two routes that you can go. And if one of those two routes is fucked, then you have probably dyslexia. So let's read about that. Profiles of acquired central dyslexia. So now before we had peripheral dyslexia forms. Well, the only form we did was pure dyslexia, which basically was like you can't actually read the words properly, but then like when you read them, you know what they mean, and like you don't have any problems with it. And this is central dyslexia. So now it's like you can read the word, and then everything that you have to do after reading the word, so like pronouncing the word or knowing what the word means, that is problematic now. Okay? So, okay. So we in this shit, man. We in this shit. Fuck's sake. I just want to be comfy right now. I don't even care. This is some real shit. This is how I actually study. I hope you guys can hear me. I don't really know. So basically, some patients are able to read non-words and regularly spelled words better than irregularly spelled words, which they tend to pronounce as if they were regular. So basically, there are some people who will spell words or pronounce words always like the actual rules of the language suggest that they have to pronounce them with. And that is called surface dyslexia. And what that means is that basically this green route is damaged or doesn't work properly for people with surface dyslexia. This route. So like they don't actually know or remember what the word is spelled like, so they don't have that like access. So they just always go on the red route of okay, what is the general rules of pronunciation, and then they just pronounce it with the same rules over and over again. So yeah, cool. Then there's another type of acquired dyslexia that is called phonological dyslexia. These patients are able to read real words better than non-words, although it is to be noted that real word reading is not necessarily 100% correct. So they have problems in aspects of phonological processing, but they can perceive the written word accurately. So basically, they don't have this route. They don't know the general rules of like how to pronounce words, but they do know the words, and they do kind of know how to pronounce them anyway. So when they recognize a word, they just pronounce it as it has to be pronounced. And it doesn't matter. They don't actually care about the like spelling rules. Cool. So that would be phonological dyslexia, because they don't know how to phonologe. What are you talking about, Stella, right now? I don't even know. Oh, Deidre Mengendoot, Didi Megadoodoo. That's on purpose, man. Okay. Then there's another type. So there's 3 types of dyslexia here. Surface dyslexia, where people know how to read words, but they cannot read the exceptions of words. They can only read the actual, like, with the rules of reading, and they never break the rules of reading, kind of. So they can't remember how irregular words are pronounced when they're reading them out loud. Then there's phonological dyslexia, where people can't read new words, or like they know a certain bunch of words, and like they can read those if they have a memory of that word and they know what it means, but they don't apply the general rules of reading onto words they don't know, you know? And then the third form of dyslexia is deep dyslexia. So deep. And in that resembles, so that form of dyslexia resembles phonological dyslexia in that real words are read better than non-words. So it is kind of similar to phonological dyslexia, because they actually can read real words better. But in which real word reading is more error-prone and results in a particularly intriguing type of error, a semantic error. So people read cat and they say dog. So they're reading cat as dog, and this is termed deep dyslexia. Because they're not making an error of reading, they're making an error of the meaning of the word. Okay. And that is when both of these freaking lines, paths are fucked. I don't know. those people with deep dyslexia also have a difficulty in reading low imaginability relative to high imaginability words. So if you read the word truth, they can't read it very well because they don't, like, it's not a real thing, right? Like, truth is a very abstract concept. Whereas if they read the word glasses, they know what glasses look like they have a mental representation of glasses because they know what they are. It's like glasses. But the word truth is like it's an abstract concept, right? So they can't actually read it that well, which is pretty interesting. The most common way of explaining deep dyslexia is to assume that both reading routes are impaired. And there's also the theory of a third route, which is a big question mark, actually. So there's actually a thing, and I don't know. Okay, whatever. So yeah, and obviously also words that are more common and words that are regularly pronounced are pronounced easier than words that are very uncommon and that are pronounced irregularly. Okay. So for this third route, so we have the two routes already, right? Like the phonological, how's it called? Wait. We have the grapheme phoneme route and the semantic route. And there's a theory that there's a third route on how to pronounce words. And one of those theories is called the summation hypothesis. The summation hypothesis states that lexical representations in reading are selected by summing the activation from the semantic system and from the grapheme phoneme conversion. So basically it means that the two paths are just being like used together to form a word, and that's the third route, kind of. But that's a big question mark. I mean, we don't actually know. Oh. Oh, rip then, Stella. Okay. What has functional imaging revealed about the existence of multiple routes? Okay, so now it's basically like what kind of brain regions are activated in reading. So we have the inferior frontal lobe, so it's like somewhere here in there somewhere, and that is that has shown to be activated in reading and language processing in general. The region is activated more by low frequency words, so the frontal region is activated more by words we don't hear very often. And that have irregular spelling. So I can show you. I'll color it in for you guys. The inferior frick. I shall color it in for you guys. I colored it in for you guys. So this right here is the inferior frontal lobe because it's inside and it's in the frontal lobe. And this one kinda is activated when we have a word that is not very common and that has irregular spelling. So we need that extra brain power for those difficult words. The assumption is that more cognitive effort manifests itself in greater bold activity. So like that area lights up more if we need more brain power. As I just said it in a more fun way. The pattern is neither a specific profile of surface dyslexia or phonological dyslexia, but a mix of the two. This suggests that the region does indeed serve multiple functions during reading, rather than being specifically tied to one process or route. So the inferior frontal cortex is actually kind of just there to help out if you need more info or more like processing power when reading, but it's not like, it doesn't have like one specific purpose, it's just kind of there. Alright, so the inferior parietal lobe. The inferior parietal lobe, so like parietal is like this stripe here, and then inferior means inside. Consists of two anatomical regions, the supramarginal gyrus and the angular gyrus. Cool. The angular gyrus has been linked to verbal working memory and binding semantic concepts together. With particular reference to reading, it has been suggested that the left supramarginal gyrus is implicated in grapheme-phoneme conversion. So that one is the one that's like, that always follows the rules of spelling. So if you read the supramarginal gyrus is left supramarginal parietal gyrus is activated, that means that when you're reading, you always follow the language pattern and like the rules of reading, kind of, and you don't just you don't use the irregular spelling, kind of. Yeah, okay. It tends to be activated more by non-words than words, and evidence from intracranial EEG suggests that reading for longer non-words is linked to longer duration of EEG activity and increased bold signal. These findings suggests piecemeal processing of letter string rather than holistic recognition. So that part of the holistic on the left side, that bad boy, basically is there for you if you have irregular words or non-words that are longer, and like you really need to read that word but like you don't actually know how to read it, so you just use the general rules of language, and then that bad boy just activates. And it is also suggested that this part activates or this part processes information serially and not as a whole word. So like if you read that word, this part of the brain is not going to read the whole word, but it's just going to read the letters or the syllables in order, or like from one to one and not in parallel. Cool. So I don't know if there's like a drawing of that. I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure like this is the, yeah, it's grapheme-phoneme conversion. So this is like back here. Where's my, yeah, back here somewhere. In here. That's the superior inferior parietal lobe on the left side. And that bad boy is just gonna help you out. Cool. Then we have the anterior and mid-temporal lobe. So anterior means in front, and mid-temporal means like here. So where is it then? Anterior? I don't know. Maybe there's no picture for that one. Oh no, there is a picture for that one. So that has to be the anterior and temporal. That has to be those two. Right? Anterior and mid-temporal. So mid-temporal should be that. And anterior should be that. I think. I don't know. It doesn't really specify here. These regions of the brain are strongly implicated in supporting semantic memory. So they actually have the memory of the meaning of the words. Within models of reading, they would contribute to reading by a meaning route, blah, blah, blah. So that's the second route in that model. So like, that would be the part of the brain that actually activates when you know the word and you know the meaning of the word, so you just process the whole word as one, and you can just read the whole word as one, and you don't have to read the word one by one, and so on. Okay. In summary, the evidence from functional imaging suggests that different brain regions are involved in reading via grapheme-phoneme conversion and reading by meaning. This evidence generally supports the dual route notion, but does not, at present, discriminate well between different versions of it. Other regions, for example the left inferior frontal lobe, have an important role in reading, but serve an unclear function as they do not clearly map onto a construct within current cognitive models. So basically we don't know if the left inferior frontal lobe actually does anything. But he's there, like supporting. But we just don't have any theories to put it into something. But he's definitely there. Wow, the lighting is kind of weird right now. AKA, I look kind of ugly right now. But hey, that's just how it be sometimes. Okay. Is the same reading system universal across languages? Now that's a question. That's a question. Anyway, evidence suggests that the same reading system is indeed used across other languages, but the different routes and components may be weighted differently according to the culture-specific demands. For example, Italian speakers appear to activate more strongly in areas involved in the phonemic processing. So if you have a language that actually gets where you can actually just read every syllable as it is, and you follow the rules of language really strictly, then you also activate that kind of brain route more than in a language like English, for example, where you need a lot more of the lexical knowledge. So you actually need to know what the word means, and you need to remember how the word is spelled, because it is spelled irregularly, and you can't just apply the general rules of language onto that of English, because it won't make any sense in that language. So, okay. And then we have Chinese. Although reading Chinese logographs may make more demands on brain regions involved in semantics than reading English. So, when you read Chinese, it's actually kind of in the brain, it gets processed similarly as English, but even more, needs even more knowledge about how a word is pronounced, because the actual logograph doesn't give information on how to pronounce it very much at all, actually. So yeah, that's the difference in languages. Oh, it goes on. Okay, okay, it goes on. Yikes. So there was also. So of course, there is also different. You know how you can have like dyslexia and like different routes are fucked in your dyslexia? And for example, if your semantic route is fucked when you know Italian, it's actually not that big of a problem, because like in Italian you actually always go the other route anyway, you know? So like in Italian, thank you for the follow, in Italian you read the words as they are anyway, so you don't actually need to have the knowledge of how the words is pronounced anyway, because most of them are regular anyway. The same is true with, if you don't know how to pronounce words but you can remember them really well, then Chinese or English will be easier, because there you don't even have to pronounce them anyway. But of course there are still people who will be dyslexic in either form, in either language, and the results suggests that there are non-semantic routes for linking print with sound, even in scripts that are not based on alphabetic principles. So that is referring to, for example, Chinese. I think this is Chinese, So this is a picture of Chinese, and you can see like these are, for example, very similar drawings or very similar symbols that are also probably read similarly, I would assume. And so you actually can still read those symbols based on the non-semantic route, so based on the route that where you have to read the word in order to know how to pronounce it. Yeah, even though they don't have the alphabetic principle, but they still have a certain pattern that these words still follow. Hi, I'm questionable. I'm half asleep, but want knowledge for bigger brain. Big brain. Yeah, that's the right stream for you, buddy. Alright, now we come to spelling and writing. Oh god, okay. A model of spelling and writing. So now we're actually so now we know how reading works, and now we're at the writing part. So like, how do I write the words? What the frick is going on? So there's also, so we already know that we have like the two route models of reading, and there is a theory that from this dual route model, the one route with the phoneme grapheme conversion, so like the one where you have to know the rules of the language, is hypothesized to be a component of spelling. So you also need that shit to spell, because you need to know the rules of the language in order to spell. Okay. The principal line of evidence for this model comes from the acquired dysgraphias. So dysgraphia means you can't write, basically. In surface dysgraphia, patients are better at spelling dictation regularly spelled words and non-words, and are poor with irregularly spelled words. Okay. This is considered to be due to damage in the lexical semantic route and reliance on phoneme grapheme conversion. So it's basically the same theory as before with reading, but just now with spelling. Like you have the same routes, but now with spelling. So like with writing. In contrast, patients with phonological dysgraphia are able to spell real words better than non-words. This has been explained as a difficulty in phoneme grapheme conversion or a problem in phonological segmentation itself. So this is actually exactly the same theories as before, where but just like instead of with reading, now it's with writing. Which suggests that those two are actually very closely related. And there's also a third version, which is deep dysgraphia, and very much like deep dyslexia, you would spell, for example, if you tell someone to spell cat, they will spell it as D-O-G, which means dog. So yeah. It is important to note that all of these spelling disorders are generally independent of the modality of output. For example, a surface dysgraphic patient would tend to produce the same kinds of errors in writing, typing, and oral spelling. So basically, those types of errors are not bound to one output, but they actually just produce these mistakes when they're typing, when they're like spelling the words orally, or when they're writing them down. So yeah, so we have the three same kinds of, three same types of dysgraphia as we have dyslexia, with the same model of language production. You know what I mean? Okay, whatever. The graphemic buffer. The graphemic buffer is a short-term memory component that holds onto the string of abstract letter identities while output process, for writing or typing and so on, are engaged. As with other short-term memory systems, the graphemic buffer may be mediated by particular frontoparietal networks. So basically, when you're writing something down, you need a graphemic buffer, which means you need a short-term memory which remembers what you wanted to write down. So when you write down butterfly, you write B-U-T and then you forget what you wanted to write. So we need a graphemic buffer, which is our short-term memory, that remembers the word while we're writing it, so that we can focus on the writing but not forget about the word. Cool. Okay. Oh yeah, there's also, okay. So there's also a study about writing errors, which is pretty funny. So a study out of Cambridge considered letter-based errors that were believed to reflect output errors, so slips of the pen, rather than errors based on lack of knowledge or of true spelling. So basically, these researchers at Cambridge, they analyzed spelling errors of the entrance exam of Cambridge students, and they interpreted the spelling errors not as errors because the people didn't know how to spell it, but just because they just made a small mistake, like a memory mistake or something. These errors consisted of letter transportations, so they didn't write hosre instead of horse. Substitutions, so for example, they wrote hops instead of horse. So the P, well, this doesn't actually make sense, wait. Hops instead of horse. So they forgot to put the R, so they made a P instead of an R. They made omissions, so they wrote hose instead of horse. And they had additions, so they had horace instead of horse. These errors were assumed to arise from noise or interference between letters in the graphemic buffer. So these were interpreted as mistakes of the short-term memory of the graphemic buffer. One additional characteristic of these errors is that they tend to cluster in the middle of the words, giving them an inverted U-shape distribution. So if you have a word, they would almost never make mistakes in the first letter and the last letter, but mostly in the middle of the word. And that graph looks like this. So this is the amounts of errors, and this is how long the word is, and usually the mistakes would be right in the middle of the word. Mit der Tastatur bin ich schneller als mit dem Stift. Es geht ja nicht um Schnelligkeit, sondern es geht um die Arten der Fehler, die du machst hier. Auch schon vorhin. Also es geht nicht darum, wie schnell du bist, sondern es geht darum, wie viele oder welche Fehler du machst, wenn du schreibst. Alright. This is consistent with the central position of the graphemic buffer in the cognitive architecture of spelling. In addition, word length has a significant effect on the probability of an error. This is consistent with its role as a limited capacity retention system. So basically, the longer the word, the more likely you are to make a mistake in that word. Also because the graphemic buffer has a limited capacity. So if you have a really long word, the graphemic buffer actually doesn't have as much space to save the information, and thus you'd make more errors. There's evidence to suggest that the information held in the graphemic buffer consists of more than just linear string of letter identities. In particular, it has been argued that consecutive double letters, zum Beispiel, for example, the double B in rabbit, have a special status, which means that if you spell a rabbit, or if you have any double letters, those are actually taken as one entity. So it happens very rarely that someone spells rabbit because the double B is seen as one entity, as a double letter. But it does happen more often that you spell rabbit with a double T, for example, because the T is the like double letter went from the B to the T, but it's still considered like a double letter, like it's still remembered as a double letter. So yeah, that's interesting that double letters actually have a special role in memory and in spelling. Output processes in writing and oral spelling. The grapheme is the most abstract description that specifies letter identity, whereas an allograph refers to the letters that are specified for shape, but not motor output, and the graph refers to a specification of stroke order, size, and direction. So you have three different... Oh fuck, I'm so tired. So we have three different differentiations. So a grapheme is the most abstract description that specifies letter identity. So a grapheme could be an R or an R, like, or a different font of R, or like different types of spelling or something. But it's just like it's recognized as a grapheme, which means the letter R in any way, shape, or form is recognized as the letter R. Then when you have an allograph, that refers to the letters that are specified for shape. So an allograph would be, it would make a difference if you would make a higher uppercase or lowercase, if you would make squiggly text R versus I don't know, Arial word style R, etc. And the graph refers to the specific stroke order of the letter. So a graph is, for example, if you make an R, it's like one time down, one time this direction, like a little, I don't know, little belly, and then another leg, so to say. That would be a graph. And then there was a study, blah blah blah. And this suggests that the output codes in writing are primarily motoric rather than visual spatial. Fuck, I don't know what kind of study they made. Oh yeah, and the grapheme, allograph, or graph, those three things can be damaged, and you can develop spelling errors, or yeah. So for example, if you have damage in the allographic level, you don't differentiate between different case anymore. So you would actually write in mixed case. So like you would write a word like this, because you don't differentiate. You just know that what the letters mean and what the word means, but you don't actually differentiate between the different cases, you know. And mm, mm, okay, so they made a couple of studies with people with allographic damage, and that suggests that the output codes in writing are primarily motoric rather than visual spatial, because they let the people like either copy a letter, and when they were copying the letter they could perfectly resemble the letter, and if they had to do it from memory, so like from spelling, then they did it wrong, kind of. So yeah, the unusual spelling and writing of Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, I'm not gonna read that. If someone cares, then please, I don't know, whatever. Basically, Leonardo da Vinci actually had problems with writing and spelling. More specified, he was surface dyslexic and dysgraphic, and he also had trouble with allography, I think. Yeah, so like his word, actually Leonardo da Vinci was not very good at spelling, apparently. Then there's also another form of disorder, which is afferent dysgraphia, and they make many stroke omissions in addition to writing. So they have problems on the level of the graph, where they have trouble with the stroke order. So if they want to write an R, they have trouble what the stroke order is and what kind of strokes they have to make, you know? And that it suggests that these dysgraphic patients are unable to utilize sensory motor feedback, even though basic sensation, for example vision and proprioception, is largely unimpaired. So basically they're having trouble with their motor ability feedback towards the brain what they already wrote. And how we have an example here on how they write to, for example, wig. God, oh my god, okay. Can you see? Hello? What the hell? Can I focus? Wait. There. Oh my god. Wait, so like this maybe? Hello? No? Almost. Yes. No, yes. Okay. There we go. So that is how people like that will spell. They have problems with the actual motor sensory output, and so they will make mistakes in actually writing the words. So I think that's pretty interesting to see, actually. So they don't have the feedback in their brains to say, okay, have we written this yet? Is this stroke complete? Can we go to the next one? And so on. Okay, I think that was long enough. Alright. So I think before we go to the next topic, I just need to go to the toilet real quick. The next topic is going to be, does spelling use the same mechanics as reading? Wow. Okay, we're back. Whoop. Hello. I got some freaking Fanta because I'm off of energy drinks now. I still have one left, so I might drink it at one point. But I thought to myself, okay, I already drink one coffee in the morning. So I'm just gonna go on this rant because I just want to. Basically, I already drink a coffee in the morning, and I'm like, I don't need more caffeine, realistically. Like, it's just not good for me. Like, I get a little too activated from caffeine, especially in the, like, I usually drink a Red Bull if I'm studying for lunch, and I do really like the taste, you know. I like something sweet, a little bubbly. It's just a pleasure, and I've come to realize that it's just too much caffeine. So I still want to have something bubbly and sweet, but also not caffeine. So my next option was Fanta, not sponsored, but please sponsor me, Coca-Cola. So yeah, I'm trying that right now. It's still not healthy, I realize that, but it's like, I want something sweet, I want some sugar. I don't know. So there's that. Hi Fiborak, how you doing? Wann wird die Katze wach? Ich weiß nicht, frag sie. Momo, wann wirst du wach? Nicht jetzt, hat sie gesagt. Yeah. Eat some fruit. You're like my mom. Oh mom, I'm hungry. Yeah, eat some fruit. Like, no, fuck off. I want my goddamn fizzy drink. Like, one fizzy drink. Drink natural juice. Yeah, I do that as well. I usually have, like, I don't know, either cranberry juice or like orange juice. But I just want the unhealthy stuff. I don't know what it is. Like, when I'm studying, I need like one, you know, I need to treat myself a little bit. So that's my treat for studying, is a Fanta. I usually don't do this, but like, I don't know, I just need it. I need it for the feels, man, I need it for mental health. It's not physically healthy, but I definitely need it to be a little bit of a rebel sometimes. Oops. So yeah, let's see how Momo is doing. Hi. Okay. I don't know, so Momo usually just has a long sleeping phase. So Momo wakes up with me and she is really hyperactive in the morning, and then yeah, around like 11-12 she really settles down, and she will usually sleep pretty much the entire afternoon until, I don't know, she just sleeps a lot. Hey. So yeah. My mom also saying that, but one day I realized if I want a good health and a good body, I need to use natural things. I decided to do that. I mean, it's true. Like, I'm not saying you're wrong. You're definitely right. But I just need one unhealthy thing a day, okay? Also, I have hazelnuts. So. Aber du weißt ja, was Zucker macht bei mir. Hey. Zucker hilft tatsächlich bei mir. Also, ich würde jetzt nicht sagen, dass Fanta der beste Zucker überhaupt ist, aber Zucker ist tatsächlich hilfreich beim Lernen, weil der Zucker direkt ins Gehirn geht und das Gehirn wird eigentlich hauptsächlich gesteuert von Glucose. Deswegen ist eigentlich Zucker ganz förderlich beim Lernen. Man muss nur den richtigen Zucker essen. Das heißt, Traubenzucker zum Beispiel ist ziemlich gut, aber fuck Traubenzucker, Mann. I'm just gonna eat a nut. Alright, so does spelling use the same mechanisms as reading? We're about to find out. There's some evidence to suggest that the same lexicon may support both reading and spelling. Then there was about 2 studies. These studies conclude that this reflects loss of word forms from a lexicon shared between reading and spelling. So basically, reading and spelling from those two studies share the mechanisms. There's also some evidence to suggest that the same graphemic buffer is employed both in reading and spelling. So like the short-term memory for like keeping words in mind is in place for reading and spelling. Thank you for the follow. And then blah blah blah. What the frick is afferent dysgraphia? Oh, that was the last chapter. I'm just crackling some nuts, dude. Bloop. Thank you for the follow. This is the most like real stream it will ever get, because this is actually my life. Like, I'm doing weird things like cracking nuts from my parents' garden and studying, and that's basically my life, so you're welcome. What the frick, man? Okay, so reading and spelling may share the same shit. Functional imaging studies of writing activate a region on the left fusiform that is the same as the so-called visual word form area implicated in reading. It appears that reading and spelling have something in common in terms of anatomy. So far, evidence actually suggests that reading and spelling do have the same mechanisms in the brain, and they share the same shit. I don't know. One day I'll actually, by accident, just crack my freaking hand. Do you study at Germany? No, I study in Austria. But yeah, like, I do study in German. Sometimes. Clearly right now I'm not. What the hell? Okay, so summary and key points of the chapter. The recognition of letters within words occurs automatically and in parallel, and is supported by knowledge of the structure of the language. For example, which letters tend to go together. Evidence of top-down effects from semantics down to visual word recognition remains controversial. The actual most of the evidence that apparently supports this position is also consistent with post-access decision mechanisms and lexical priming. Okay. A region in the left fusiform gyrus responds to familiar letter strings more than false letter strings or consonant strings. This has been termed the visual word form area, although it might also respond to some degree of other types of stimuli. Evidence from acquired dyslexia suggests that there are at least two routes used in reading words aloud. A sublexical route that translates graphemes into phonemes, impaired in phonological dyslexia, and a lexical semantic route impaired in surface dyslexia. There is evidence to suggest that many of the components involved in reading are also involved in spelling. Letter representations used in spelling and writing exist at several levels. In abstract, graphemic level, at a level that specifies case and style, allograph, and at a level that specifies the abstract motor commands, the graph level. Okay. Is German's Deutsch better than Austrian's Deutsch? It's the same. We just have some different words in Austria for some things. But it's the same. Okay, guys. Exam time. If you can answer all these questions, You have to gift me 5 subs. Which is really unfair, but whatever. Okay, question number 1. Is there a visual lexicon or a visual word from area that is used to support visual word recognition? Guys, is there a visual lexicon or a visual word from area that is used to support visual word recognition? The answer is yes. Evidence so far suggests that there is. What is the evidence for top-down influences in visual word recognition? Guys, wieso schaust du heute so mega ungepflegt aus? Oh, fuck you, Mann. Ich habe mir die Haare nicht geflechtet, deswegen vielleicht. Alle sind Kritiker, man. I mean, accent. I mean, it depends which one you think is better. It's really subjective. I think the Austrian accent is better. It's more fun. The evidence for top-down influences in visual word recognition is that there is a parallel processing of words and for letters, because words that are shorter, words that are longer don't get read longer, or don't need longer processing time than shorter words, which suggests that the words are being processed in parallel rather than serially, which suggests a top-down process. You guys didn't get that one right. I don't have high English, I don't understand questions. Alright, that sucks. How many routes are there for reading a word out loud? So basically there's 2 routes for that. One is the grapheme-phoneme route, and the other one is the semantic-lexical route. There is also still like suggestions or like discussions about a 3rd route, but that one is not really like, we don't really have evidence for that one. It's just yikes. To what extent is the cognitive/neural architecture for reading and spelling common to speakers of different languages? So both of the routes for different languages still get used. However, different languages have different balance on the 2 routes. So more opaque languages actually have a bigger emphasis on the lexical semantic route, and more transparent languages have a bigger emphasis on the grapheme-phoneme route. Does spelling use the same cognitive mechanisms as reading? Evidence suggests that it does have the same architectural and theoretical underlying mechanisms or underlying processes. So evidence is strongly for the fact that they use the same mechanisms. Okay, we're done with the literate brain. Yes.